Morning. We are now at the conclusion of another season of the church. And I want to share with you this morning our scripture, but I want to share it in a paraphrase written by Debbie Thomas. And so listen carefully as she ties this rather long passage together. On the mountain, a man bent in prayer erupts in sudden light. As glory leaks from every pore, 3 sleepy disciples cower in the grass and watch their master glow. 2 figures appear out of time and space. In solemn tones they speak of Exodus and accomplishment in Jerusalem. And the disciples, comprehending nothing, babble nonsense in response. Let's make tents. Let's stay here a while. Always. This is good. The cloud descends, thick and impenetrable. As it envelopes the disciples, they fall to their faces, certain the end has come. But a voice addresses them. A voice tender and gentle. This is my son, my chosen. The voice hums with delight, and the disciples, braver now, look up and they gaze at their master, the shining one, and a father's pure joy sings with the stars. This is my beloved son, listen to him. In the valley, a boy writhes in the dust. He drools, he cannot hear, and his eyes wide open, feral, sees nothing but darkness. Around him a crowd gathers and swells, eager for spectacle. Scribes jeer and disciples wring their hands in shame. Frauds, someone yells into the night. Charlatans, where's your master? The scribes ask the disciples in umpteenth times. Why has he left you? We don't know, the disciples mutter, gesturing vaguely at the mountain. Panic wars with exhaustion as they hear the boy shriek yet again, an echo straight from hell. He flails, and his limbs assault his stricken face. A voice, strangled, singular, rends the night. This is my son. A man cries out as he pushes through the crowd to gather the convulsing boy in his arms. Everyone stares as the father cradles the wreck of a child against his chest. Please, he sobs to the stars. Please, this is my beloved son. Listen to him.
An interesting word. The Greek word is metamorpho, and it means to transform, literally or figuratively. Kind of like the metamorphosis that happens when a caterpillar is transformed into a butterfly. The word is a verb that means to change into another form. In the case of the Transfiguration of Jesus Christ, it means to match the outside with the reality of the inside. The same thing happened with Moses on Mount Sinai. In Exodus 34:29, it says, Moses came down from Mount Sinai. As he came down from the mountain with the 2 tablets of the covenant in his hand, Moses did not know that the skin of his face shone because he had been talking with God. This transfiguration experience that happened with Jesus, Peter, James, and John was kind of a follow-up to that transfiguration that happened years and years earlier to Moses on Mount Sinai. The first time was Moses in the flesh and Jesus in the spirit coming to him. The second time was Jesus in the flesh and Moses coming to him in spirit. Both experiences took place on a mountain. When we have a glorious experience, we call it a mountaintop experience. In both cases, the glory and light of God shone in a way that was beyond explanation. But whatever it was, you could actually see a visible difference. You could see that metamorphosis happen on their face. And for Moses, it was too much. He had to actually wear a veil after that because the glory was all over him and he had to tone it down some. It was different with Jesus and the disciples. 2 Corinthians 3 talks about the fact that in this case, when they experienced the Spirit and glory of God, unlike Moses, there's nothing to hide. They can let it burn bright. Corinthians 3:17 says, "Now the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there's freedom." So whenever we face the glory of God, it's a living presence. We get the real thing. This is what Jesus was showing us. It's not just a piece of chiseled stone that used to be the representation of God. Now God is giving us the true Spirit of Himself, which leads us to freedom. The old hidden way is now obsolete. We can humbly but boldly enter His presence and let our lives shine brighter and brighter as we're made to be more and more like Him. In Luke 9:33 it said, just as they were leaving Him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." And then it says, he didn't know what he said. Peter wanted to take a picture or a photograph of it instead of being present enough to experience it. He immediately started wanting to do something that would document it. He started saying, okay, let's build 3 memorials to Elijah and Moses and Jesus. And in the middle of while he's saying that, there's this cloud of white light that was enveloping him and everyone else. It was this amazing experience that he could have been present with and just experienced it, but instead he wanted to mark the occasion. And we do the same thing so often when we experience something good. We want to market the occasion. But doing that actually means stepping out and away from the occasion. So they all became immersed in this light, everyone there on the mountain, and the presence of God came over them like a cloud, and there was this voice out of the cloud. It was God's voice saying, "This is my Son. This is my chosen one. Listen to Him." Imagine how James and John and Peter felt. This was a demonstration for them, for these 3 guys who were going to carry on the message of the church. This was a demonstration that Jesus was exactly who He claimed to be. And the best part of this story is that through the Spirit of Christ, we have access to this same glorious light that the disciples had that day. A light that heals us and guides us and empowers us to die to ourselves so we can be raised to walk in the newness of life. This is our invitation, to be crucified with Christ, to die and believe in the resurrection of Christ. We saw it with Jesus, and we get to experience it within the body.
In the church life and the calendar, this is Transfiguration Sunday. It's the apex of the liturgical season of Epiphany. After weeks of hints and intimations, a star, a dove, 6 jars of wine, today we stand in full sunlight, basking in the beloved's glory. Today we hear the very voice of God. All of the synoptic gospels tell the story of the Transfiguration, which in itself says to us that it was an important event in the early church. And all of them and their accounts end their accounts with this narrative of the demon-possessed boy. Not as a postscript, but as a, shall we say, meanwhile. Or as one author puts it, here's what was happening down below while Jesus turned bleachy on a hilltop. As I said, we've come to the end of another season, of the season of Epiphany. And when we're particularly we've been attuned to the ways and the times that God is manifested in our lives and in the life of the world. And here on the edge of Lent, as we turn with Jesus towards Jerusalem and the Mount of Calvary, we pause on another mountain for one of those peak experiences, those mountaintop experiences, those experiences that are so sought after in this day and age in which we sort of the post-enlightenment and the scientifically minded, as well as those who call themselves postmodern, whatever you want to call this age that we're in, we long for these mountaintop experiences. What is it about that deep human longing to taste, however briefly, the transcendence of God? Peter, James, and John got much more than a brief taste. They had one of those deeply intense, ecstatic experiences that might have transformed their lives then and there, except that they didn't know what to do with what happened. Sleepy-headed Peter, the text says, practically babbled, not knowing what he said. Offering to put up tents, which is simply, as the little video clip said, to preserve the experience. We are sure that he was, of course, only trying to be helpful. Good intentions. Over the centuries, the Transfiguration has steadily accumulated meanings, most of them thickly theological. And that, after all, is what we humans do, right? I mean, we take the indescribable and we insist on containing it in some kind of a theological context in which, well, we understand it. The Transfiguration is important, profoundly important, because it reveals Christ's divine nature. It confirms his sonship. It foreshadows his death. It secures his place in the stream of Israel's salvation history, and it exalts him above the law, Moses, above the prophets, Elijah, and it prefigures his resurrection. So it's important, profoundly important. But what of in the words of Paul Harvey, the rest of the story? The sick boy's parallel story. Actually, the common lectionary, separates these. They give us the Transfiguration story today, but they bracket the other part. But this is one story. This is not two separate things that happen years apart or months apart or even weeks apart. What are the sick boy's parallels? Why is it here? Why have the authors been instructed to include it? Was it only to underscore a spiritual point that mountaintop experiences aren't meant to last? If the bumbling Peter thought it would be cool to pitch a tent on Mount Glory, then the sick boy functioned as a convenient corrective. No, Peter. No. That's actually not the plan. You can't stay up there. The world needs you. Get down. Get down. We have no idea. We have no idea how the crowd at the base of the mountain experienced the Transfiguration. I like the way that Debbie put that in the reading I did at the beginning. It's just thoughts, an image that she's created in her mind. But we really have no idea what was going on down in the valley as the Transfiguration was taking place on the mountaintop. Did Jesus' fierce light cast even a single beam downwards towards the valley? Those who waited in the dark? Did the crowd glimpse the ominous cloud that descended over Peter and James and John? Did they hear even a rumble, distant like thunder, when God spoke of his chosen one? We'll never know. But I think it's in between the lines there. What we do know is this, is that Jesus invited 3 disciples, only 3, up the mountain. And what we know is that the remaining 9 spent the night in anxious futility, trying in vain to do their master's good work as the stakes rose higher and higher and higher still. What we know is that the scene soon became tense, and to a certain degree it became ugly. A breeding ground for anger and shame and despair and doubt. I mean, after all, they sort of got dropped and left. And did the better ones get asked up the mountain? What we know is that an anguished father and a broken son suffered mightily for hours, even as the heavens broke open above their heads. What we know is that many people who needed Jesus that night experienced only the ache of his absence. He wasn't down there performing miracles and all of the things that he had been doing. He was up the mountain with that select few who had reached the pinnacle and were basking in glory. You know, early this morning, Okanagan Mountain shone brilliant. The snow and the sun as it rose and hit it, it was just brilliant. Mountains are particular and they're poignant. They rise up from the plains of our lives to invite majesty and awe, wonder and fear, to call to mind the heights of the heavens and yet the reality of the valleys that are in between. Mountains have a way of disarming us, don't they? I mean, there are those who choose to conquer certain mountains, whether it's an item on a bucket list or simply a quest to meet a certain life need, a certain want or desire. The truth is, mountains can kill us. And perhaps even there's a certain truth to that when it comes to the Transfiguration. Mountains have a way of disrupting us. They change our framework, our way of seeing the world. Because you see, mountains don't lie. They're there. They're there. You can't just pull them aside and get to the level. They're there. Mountains have a way of transforming us as well. And I think all of us, unless we're absolutely terrified of heights, have stood on some mountaintop somewhere and just have been in awe and in a way transform us. Yet at the same time, I think that we see here the difference between Luke's version of the Transfiguration and Matthew and Mark. Notice that immediately after Jesus descends from the mountain in Luke, he is met with need. Whereas Matthew and Mark include a dialogue about Elijah, in Luke, Jesus has to address healing, not theology. And that may be Luke's bent. We know that he had that insight within his writings. But that's what Luke gets into. Need, healing, care, not theology. Is this perhaps what our text this morning is saying to us? The Transfiguration from Luke, that mountaintops provide moments for seeing reality and not making up theology. That mountaintops create spaces for perspectives. Instead of justifying preconceived perceptions, that mountaintops truly change our way of interpreting or making sense of the world. The Celtic folk had a wonderful phrase for those mountaintop experiences. They called them thin places. That place where there was a crack between heaven and earth and they flowed together. You know, we tend to interpret the Bible as if its stories apply only to me, an individual. You know, my mountaintop experience, my valley, my relationship with God. But in some ways, let me suggest that it's misguided, even dangerous. The truth is that my mountain lies right next to your valley. The truth is that your pain and your pain does not cancel out my joy of being on the mountaintop. The truth is that it is entirely possible for you and I to sit in church on Sunday morning and bask in our own sweet presence that we have with the Spirit of God, while 2 chairs down, someone cries out because of the ache of his absence. That's the reality. It's not that because I'm on the mountaintop, I'm any better than the person that's in the valley. I'm reminded of an exquisite prayer by Walter Brueggemann in his book, Ode to Heaven, Rooted in Earth. The great biblical scholar who has spent his life helping us to connect with the God of the Bible. His prayer could be for this very occasion, although perhaps it wasn't written for Transfiguration Sunday, but it's a prayer to Jesus up on the mountaintop, but headed down to the people below who yearn for wholeness. He asks God in this prayer to move off the page to the trouble of the world, to the peace negotiations and the cancer diagnosis and the burning churches and the lynched blacks and abused children. Listen to the groans and the moans and see and hear and know and remember and come down. It's a prayer often repeated by the psalmist. We call them prayers of lament or psalms of lament. Yes, Jesus came down from the mountain. Yes, he healed the tormented boy. But we dare not forget the suffering that came before that miracle. Simply to give our religion neat lines and soft edges. The suffering was real down in the valley, while the glory was happening on the mountain. And it deserves honest witness. After all, the cry of the human father, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief, is the most authentic and the most powerful description of the Christian life that I know. He didn't find that testimony in the clouds. He forged it in the pain. So as we embark on our Lenten journey, how do we read and hear this text as a call to take what we have experienced out into the world. Thomas Merton once said, "We are living in a world that is absolutely transparent, and God is shining through it all the time." We are living in a world that is absolutely transparent, and God is shining through it all the time. How do we integrate our glimpses of God and His love, our tastes of God's glory into the everydayness of our lives? Are we awake? Are we alert to what God is doing in the world? Are we awake and alert to what God is doing in our very lives and in the life of our community of faith? Is transformation a sudden thing or a day-by-day, perhaps even hour-by-hour process? And so with Transfiguration Sunday, we come to the end of another liturgical season. Having seen the light of Epiphany, we prepare now for the long darkness of Lent. I don't know what voices will speak to us in the wilderness. Maybe you'll hear glory. Maybe I'll hear agony. Maybe we will hear each other. But whatever we hear, don't flinch. Don't flee. Both voices need to speak. Both voices have much to teach us. So privilege neither. Just listen. Both voices are beloved of the Father. I want to close this morning with a blessing for Transfiguration Sunday that Jan Richardson has written that goes along with her painting called Dazzling. Let us pray. Believe me, I know how tempting it is to remain inside this blessing, to linger where everything is dazzling and clear. We could build walls around this blessing, put a roof over it. We could bring in a table, chairs, have the most amazing meals. We could make a home, we could stay. But this blessing is built for leaving. This blessing is made for coming down the mountain. This blessing wants to be in motion, to travel with you as you return to level ground. It will seem strange how quiet this blessing becomes when it returns to earth. It is not shy, it is not afraid. It simply knows how to bide its time, to watch and wait, to discern and pray, until the moment comes when it will reveal everything it knows, when it will shine forth with all that it has seen, when it will dazzle with the unforgettable light you have carried all the way.